Hi, and welcome to the webinar series Writer to Agent, created by the Association of Writers and Writing Programs in affiliation with Folio Literary Management. We very much hope you enjoy our presentation.
Today we're going to be talking about query letters, and our hope is that by the time this webinar is done, you will know everything you need to know about submitting your work to agents. I'm Erin Harris. I'm a literary agent here at Folio, and I am on a conference call with my wonderful colleague Jamie, who will introduce herself in just a moment. But if the audio sounds a bit distant, it's because we are communicating by phone and we're not actually in the office together. It is the modern world. So I represent literary and upmarket fiction, narrative nonfiction, and select young adult titles. I have an MFA in creative writing from the New School, and I bring a strong editorial eye and a very hands-on approach to my agenting practice. Jamie, good to be on the call with you.
Thanks, Erin. My name is Jamie, and I come to Folio after 5 years on the publisher side. I was at Algonquin Books of Chapel Hill. I worked on fiction and nonfiction and in both editorial and marketing. I also have a journalism background where I was a writer and an editor for a magazine. So I've had quite a bit of experience working with writers to shape and polish their work in both fiction and nonfiction, and it's my favorite part of the process. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what is a query? And a query is an unsolicited letter that a writer would send to an agent or an editor or a publisher. That's their opportunity to talk about their book as well as their credentials. So you want to think about a query letter as kind of like a cover letter for a job application. This is your first chance to really introduce yourself and make a first impression. So you really want to make sure you get this part right. You want your letter to make you sound professional. You want to present yourself and your work in the best possible light. You should keep it to a page, excluding your sample material, which that length can vary. And you also want to make sure that you are aware of how the agents like to be queried and you follow their particular instructions.
So a question that we as agents are often asked is, when should writers submit their queries? And this differs slightly for fiction and nonfiction. So I want to tease out that distinction and demystify that process. So for fiction, the novel or short story collection needs to be a finished product. Now that doesn't simply mean a writer has finished her first draft. It means that the writer has been through multiple drafts. The writer has consulted with their peer group or writing group or beta readers, and the writer thinks that their manuscript is as polished as they can possibly make it. So until your manuscript is in that state, it is premature to be querying agents. For nonfiction, this differs slightly. Most nonfiction is sold on proposal, even some memoirs. And so when you have finished your proposal as a writer, then it is a good time to query agents. Sometimes this may mean that you have a full manuscript that's complete and sitting in your drawer and also ready to be sent, or conversely, it could mean that you are still writing the book, but you know enough about your project and you have done enough research to understand the contours of the project that you're ready to pitch it to an agent.
So when you're writing your letter, you want to keep in mind that every agent has sort of different things that they're looking for. So that's why it's so important to make sure that you really research the agents you're querying. You want to make sure that the agents that you're reaching out to are a good fit for your project. You don't want to send, for example, a science fiction manuscript to an agent who expressly says they don't accept science fiction projects. So most queries are going to be sent electronically via email, but you also want to be sure of agents' preferences because some agents prefer to get queries in the mail, or at least they will be open to mail queries. Erin, what are some things that you've seen in your experience for query letters?
So you're absolutely right. I think it's important to first identify the right or appropriate agent for your particular project, and then it's right to transmit the query letter in the way that they're asking for it to be transmitted. But there's also some variation among the kinds of materials that agents like to receive. So, for example, some agents like to receive a synopsis, and some agents don't. Some agents like to receive 5 sample pages, and some agents only ask for 1. I think it is really imperative that writers follow an agent's guidelines to the T. And there's several reasons for that. One is that this is our first introduction to you, and we want to know that you're a professional and you're someone who can follow directions and that can be trusted, and you're not a loose cannon, as it were. And also, we receive so many query letters that it's very helpful to have all the material standardized. Always be sure to follow an agent's instructions.
And one other thing to note is that as a general rule with your sample material, it should always come from the beginning of your manuscript. An agent should be able to decide if they want to read further your project from the first few pages, and a project that starts a third of the way in often indicates to an agent that possibly the writer has not started their manuscript in quite the right place, and there might be other flaws to the book.
Such a great point. Thanks for including that, Jamie.
So now that Jamie and I have talked a little bit about ways in which writers can find out more about agents and their tastes, we have a very special guest, our very own colleague, John Cusick, who we wanted to introduce, who's going to tell you more about the power of social media and how you can use social media as both a way to build community and to target the right agent and connect with agents. John, so great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. As Erin said, my name is John. I'm John Cusick. I'm a literary agent here at Folio Literary Management, and my special interest is young adult, middle grade, and kids books. I'm very active on Twitter, and I've actually found quite a few clients via social media. They've found me through social media, so it's a really great way to connect with potential agents. Social media, particularly Twitter, is a great way to network with industry professionals. But the key word is really network, not pitch. You should never directly pitch your query or your idea to an agent on social media. Chances are they have submission guidelines, which you can find online, so you always want to follow those guidelines to the T. But there's an informal aspect to social media sites like Twitter that allow you to converse with agents. You can get a sense of their taste, their personality, and their style. Also, agents and editors will sometimes tweet about the sorts of projects they're looking for. There's a hashtag on Twitter, which is hashtag MSWL, which stands for Manuscript Wishlist. And agents will tweet using that hashtag and say, oh, I'm looking for psychological thrillers, or I love a fantasy novel in the vein of Game of Thrones, etc. And so that's a great way to figure out what different agents are looking for in the moment. There is an exception to the don't pitch agents on Twitter rule, and that is pitch contests. These usually happen a few times a year. One example is PitMad, and authors can tweet out one-line pitches of their novels using a special hashtag. So in the case of PitMad, the hashtag is hashtag PitMad, P-I-T-M-A-D. And agents can search this hashtag and will typically favorite tweets to let the authors know they'd like to receive a query for this project. And agents will sort of look at Twitter throughout the day to see, what the different pitches are. You can Google these pitch contests and find out when they're occurring. Usually they take place over a day or two, with one day dedicated to kids' books or young adult projects, and another day dedicated to adult projects. Generally the thing to remember in social media is that it's a bit like a cocktail party. It's fine to say hello.
Without the cocktails.
Without the cocktails, unfortunately. Well, maybe you're drinking them at home.
Right.
Who knows? I wouldn't be surprised. But, it's fine to sort of say hello and introduce a topic of conversation. You can reply to an agent's tweet. But you wouldn't want to jump in and immediately start selling yourself or your project, if you were at a party. It's much less formal than that. It's a place for casual conversations. But those casual conversations can help make a connection and let you know which agents might be a fit for you. And they really can be the first steps towards representation.
Absolutely. John, thank you so much for these insights. You are like our in-house social media guru, so we're really delighted to have your take on things.
So now that we've talked about the research that an author needs to do before querying an agent, let's talk about what goes into a strong query letter.
So the opening of a query letter should be rather straightforward, but you'd be surprised to learn that many writers botch the salutation. You want to avoid the dear, sir, or madame construction. It feels too generic and impersonal, and also suggests to the agent that you haven't done the appropriate research one needs to conduct before reaching out. I think that I speak for you too, Jamie, when I say that it is fairly standard for the salutation to either say, Dear Ms. Harris, or to incorporate the entire agent's name, Dear Erin Harris. And that really is the best way. Hi is also too casual. A question that I'm asked often is, do you actually read your so-called slush pile, which is another word for your unsolicited submissions or your queries? And the answer is a resounding yes. I love my query letters, and I have absolutely found talent there. And we thought it would be fun to include one query that came out of my slush pile and became the novel The River at Night, which is published by Scout Press, which is the literary imprint of Gallery Books. Erica Forensic is the author of The River at Night and a debut novel, and we are going to look at the different components of a query letter and trace them through her own letter. So as you'll see in the salutation circled at the top, she addressed me as Dear Ms. Harris. The next section after the salutation is a personal but professional introduction in which the writer explains why they are reaching out to this particular agent. So it's here that you as the writer demonstrate that you've done your research and there are specific reasons that you think this agent might like your work. And I think we can give you three key points that can help you forge this connection. The first is that you can refer to an agent's bio and say, I hear that you're looking for literary novels that engage with issues of social justice. And my novel fits that bill, and that is why I'm reaching out to you. Or you could establish a personal connection. You could say, Dear Erin or Dear Jamie, I met you a year ago at this conference and was impressed by what you had to say and thought I might be a good fit for your list, and so I'm reaching out now. Or you could discuss specific books that the agent has represented. Dear Erin, I adored your author Erica Forensic's novel, The River at Night. I, too, have written a literary suspense novel that I think you might enjoy. And so let's actually turn to Erica's query letter and see what she wrote. She said, I hope this finds you well. You were my first pick to meet with at Grub Street this year, which is a conference in Boston. However, I was too late in signing up. Because of your stated affinity for literary and upmarket suspense, I thought you might be a good match for my novel. She gets an A+ in that opening. And so this goes to show that even if it's a kind of missed connection where you didn't meet the writer in person, it's the extra effort of saying, I tried to meet you, or I'm attending conferences, or I am knowledgeable in some way about your list and what it is that you do. That really can make a difference.
So moving on to some of the other parts of the query letter, the next part after you've established that connection is that you obviously want to describe your work. So you want to keep it short and sweet. You want to keep it to, at best, 1 to 2 paragraphs, definitely not more than 3. And you want to convey not everything that happens from start to finish, but what the book is fundamentally about. You want to give the agent a sense of who the protagonist is, what the central conflict is, and what is standing in the protagonist's way, what the protagonist needs to accomplish. So you want to give just enough to intrigue the agent, not tell the whole book.
No spoilers.
Right, exactly.
So after the author summarizes her work, the next component of the query letter is the comparison title section. And this is where you try to contextualize or situate your work within the existing market. Let's talk about some do's and don'ts of comparison titles, because I know folks often have questions about them. You want to ensure that you use absolutely no more than 3 comparison titles. If you're stringing 5 comparison titles together, it begins to feel a bit muddled. I would say that 2 is really ideal, but if there's a very compelling reason for including a 3rd, then go for it. You also want to avoid referencing titles that are unattainable. So to say, my work is like Harry Potter or The Catcher in the Rye is a bit of a red flag, because both of those books in very different ways were cultural phenomenons. And so while you want the comparison titles you use to indicate that your book also has the possibility of being successful in the marketplace, you don't want to use a comparison title that feels completely out of reach. Finally, you want to, and this harkens back to the previous point, you really want to choose titles that you feel accurately reflect your work. Let's return for a moment to Erica Furfick's query letter and take a look at how she described her book. So she opens with a logline, which is a 1 to 2 sentence distillation of the novel. There is an entire webinar dedicated to discussing loglines if you'd like to learn more about them. After her logline, she then describes the plot and contours of her book in 5 pithy paragraphs. This is a bit long for a summary, but we'll give it to her. Overall, she did a really great job of letting me know what was at stake, who the protagonist was, and she whet my appetite, and I wanted to read further to find out what happened. And ideally, that is what you want to accomplish when you submit a query to an agent. The final part of the query letter is the author bio, where the author shares her credentials with the agent. And this differs slightly in a fiction bio and a nonfiction bio. For fiction, the things you might want to include in your author bio at the end of the query letter are any residencies that you may have been invited to or have done. If you have an MFA from a reputable institution, if you have some kind of meaningful built-in following on social media, if you have any publications in prominent literary magazines, or for example, if your book is, about art and you have a background in art history, that might be worth mentioning. What you don't want to include are things that really are outside of the realm of what makes you uniquely qualified to write this book. So don't laugh, this sometimes really does happen. You don't want to mention that you won your 8th grade spelling bee, or you had a publication in your friend's zine, which was distributed to 4 or 5 people. So I think it's best to just use common sense, but I think this also bears spelling out, because you'd be surprised at how many unpolished bio sections we receive. So let's just take a quick glance again at what Erica wrote. So she establishes that she's been a professional writer for over 25 years. And to validate that, she talks about where she's been published. And all of these are prominent publications: Salon, the Boston Globe, National Public Radio. It's also clear that she has self-published a novel, and one of them has been optioned for film. And she has an MFA in creative writing from Boston University.
So now that we've come to the author bio portion of the query letter, Jamie and I wanted to bring in our wonderful colleague, Mike, to talk a little bit about platform and expertise in terms of nonfiction. Both platform and expertise are something that authors build before they even start querying, but you want to really highlight these things in your bio. Mike, great to have you. Thanks for being here with us.
Great to be here. So I think before you even get to the point where you start approaching agents, if you're writing nonfiction, you want to think about what level of expertise you have and what your platform is. And the more expertise you have, the less of a requirement there is for a platform, and vice versa, but ideally you really want to have both. Most nonfiction these days is heavily platform driven. So expertise can mean a lot of things. It could mean you're the world's foremost authority on something, which, you have a degree, you have certifications, it's very easy to explain why you're an expert. But in this sense, it can also mean that you just have knowledge that no one else has. So maybe you're writing a music biography and you have access to sources that will talk to you and can reveal information that has never been reported before and that we've never heard before. So that's a different form of expertise. Basically, the idea is that you have knowledge that no one has and that no one has heard. You want to have a platform from which to promote your book. Now, with some types of memoir, you don't so much need platform, because memoir is a very particular kind of nonfiction, and it's very writing dependent often, so it's kind of a different animal. But for the vast majority of nonfiction, you want to have a good platform.
Can you tell some of our listeners just define what a platform is?
Yeah, a platform is basically your means of, almost if you think about it in a literal sense, you're standing on a platform, you have a way to broadcast to the world that you've written this great book. You have a way of reaching an audience and getting the word out to people. You have a way to promote the book even beyond whatever your publisher will do for you. So one question to ask yourself is my platform big enough to really help me break through? And if the answer is I don't know, then your platform probably isn't big enough. If it's big enough, you'll know, because you'll have been working on it for a long time. And that's one mistake that a lot of authors or would-be authors make. A lot of times I hear, oh, well, once I get a book deal, I'll start working on my platform, or I'll start building an audience, or I'll start a blog, or I'll start engaging more on social media. But it's already too late by then. You really want to have started, ideally, years before, because you need to have significant numbers if, say, the success of your book is riding on your social media following, or how many newsletter subscribers you have, or how many people listen to your podcast, or whatever it happens to be.
Can you tell us what kind of numbers are meaningful?
Yeah, it varies from platform to platform. For example, Twitter followers carry less weight than, say, newsletter subscribers. But a general rule of thumb is you want to be at least into the six figures. And I don't just mean like 100,000. I mean, it should be well into six figures, ideally into seven figures, but it varies dramatically, depending on the other variables involved. But this is why I'm saying you really need to start well before you even start approaching publishers, because it takes a long time to get there. And if you're talking, you have 5,000, 10,000 people on Facebook, or whatever, that doesn't even move the needle, and you shouldn't even bring it up as an asset, because if you say, oh, it's so great, I have 15,000 people following me on Twitter, it shows that you don't understand social media and you're actually hurting yourself. So you don't even want to go there.
So it can look amateurish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because when you're talking about the qualifications that you bring as an author, it's very important to demonstrate that you understand how this whole process works and how books are promoted, and what kind of following you need and how you can reach people. So, like I said, I find that a lot of authors, they just wait too long to start on this, because the thing with social media in particular is that what you want to do is essentially be providing free content to people over a long period of time to build up familiarity, to build up trust, to really make them sort of bond with you and be anxious for whatever it is you have to say. And this is long before you want to start selling them something or asking them to do something for you. It's very much a one-way street, and a lot of people understandably are hesitant to provide content for nothing to a lot of people. But if you want to write nonfiction, and I'm assuming you hope to write more than one book, you kind of have to play the long game, and this is one way to do it. So you really, with social media, you want to get to the point where you're not so much selling them something as you're informing them of something that they already want. So you've built up this audience over time, and they're already sort of clamoring for your book. So all you're doing is just telling them, hey, the book is coming out, and the rest will happen on its own. If you're at a point where you're trying to convince people to buy your book on social media, then you've already kind of lost. So, you can put out an ad or you can put out content that isn't ostensibly an ad, and it has value on its own. You hope people will like it, and that will then drive people to your book. But that's really hard, because they may watch your video on Facebook or something, but then at the end when you say pre-order my book, then they realize they're being sold to. And if they don't already have that bond with you, then it just immediately turns them off.
So it's about forging meaningful connections.
Exactly.
With your future readers.
Exactly.
And forging those connections over time.
Yeah, and it has to be genuine. Even though you may be doing this with a book in mind down the road, it still has to be a genuine connection.
Great.
And there's this element of, if you built up an audience that is genuinely connected with you, when you do get to the point where you want them to buy your book, not only will they buy your book, but they'll go the extra mile, and they'll talk about it on social media. They'll promote it. It's almost, I think of it sort of as the phenomenon that you see with crowdfunding platforms, where people will donate more money than they need to just to get whatever rewards they want. There's this element of they just want to support you. Like, they like you, they like what they're doing, and they'll go the extra mile. And that's really how you make a book work. It's not just selling them something.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike, for offering this eye-opening information and for your expertise.
Oh, my pleasure.
So now let's talk about what a query letter shouldn't include. This is where your research into your agents that you're querying will pay off again. You don't want to send anything that the agent hasn't asked for in their submission guidelines. So if they want the submission included in the body of the email, you don't want to send it in an attachment, for example. If it's a snail mail query, you don't want to send it with glitter inside. Glitter is very annoying and have to clean it.
And that does happen. It has happened to me once or twice, truly.
It does. You want to make sure that you don't include personal details that don't really further your cause about your experience or tell about what your project is. You want to resist the urge to use scented paper, weird fonts, blinking emojis, weird background colors, anything that might be attention-grabbing for the wrong reasons. You also want to avoid the temptation to include phrases like, my book's going to be a huge bestseller, or my mom really loves this book, or this book is going to be the next, as Erin said, the next Harry Potter, the next Catcher in the Rye. These are claims that it's really difficult for your project to actually live up to.
I think many writers wonder what goes through an agent's mind as she evaluates a query. So we want to lift the veil a little bit. First of all, I think there's this kind of prevailing misconception that we're eager to reject everything, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. Every time we open our query inboxes, we're really hoping to fall in love with something, because that's what it is when you find a book that you want to represent. It is you have to feel so incredibly passionately about it and want to champion that author's career. So when I'm looking at a query letter, I'm always giving the writer the benefit of the doubt and hoping that this is going to be the right project for me. So the questions I ask myself are, does this interest me? Do I think I can sell it? This is also a really important component in evaluating query letters that I think writers sometimes may not realize. It's not just about falling in love with something artistically. There's also a business aspect to it. I have to feel like I would be the ideal person, that I would know how to place this book successfully. And then finally, we look if we've requested sample material, or if we ask for sample material to be appended to the query letter. Then if we like the concept of the book, we think we have a good idea of how to sell it and who would be right for it, then we take a look at the actual writing and assess whether we are responding to the voice. Then, beyond the query letter, other sort of things we're thinking about is the author herself. Is there an indication that we think she won't be a good business partner? Has the author submitted the query letter in accordance with their guidelines, i.e., can this writer follow directions? Is the writer organized and disciplined? Does the writer show respect for our process?
So at the end of the day, when you've written your letter, there are a couple things that above all you should keep in mind. Be respectful, be professional, be transparent.
You've sent your query letter out to agents, and let's say that you get some manuscript requests. What happens if an agent is interested? What happens if they're not interested? We'll be tackling these subjects next. As you may have intuited, this is not a kind of one-size-fits-all process. Every agent has slightly different policies or methods. Some agents only respond to their queries in the affirmative. They'll only write to you if they are interested in seeing more of your work. I think typically if you don't receive a response to your query letter within 3 weeks, it's fair to assume that that agent is not the right fit for your project. If an agent is interested in reading your project, some agents will request a full manuscript and some agents will only request a partial. Once you're corresponding with an agent, I think it's very important, as Jamie indicated earlier, to continue to be respectful and also to be transparent. At that point, you can feel free to write to them with any questions you might have or additional info or meaningful updates. So for example, you should tell them if multiple agents are considering your manuscript. And if you do in fact receive an offer of representation or multiple offers of representation, it's important to follow up with all of the agents that are considering your work to apprise them of the situation and to discuss with them a date by which you would need to make your decision about representation. And the idea behind that is you really want to be fair and you want to give every agent who's considering the possibility to finish the manuscript and to pitch themselves to you. The tables have then turned.
So a question that we get asked sometimes is, what if my query letter isn't strong? Does that sandbag my whole project? And the good news is no, it doesn't. Often some people are really good at query letters and some people may not be as good at presenting their work, but the work itself is really great. At the end of the day, your query letter isn't going to make or break you. It will help get an agent's attention, but at the end of the day, ultimately, it's about the work.
Absolutely. And something else that I would add, Jamie, is that I also think a query letter can be a really great artistic tool for a writer. If you're seeing issues in the query letter can be a kind of mirror where you might be able to see the reflection of your manuscript more clearly. And if you're having issues talking about your work or distilling it in and talking about it in a succinct way, it may be because there is actually something that's problematic about the manuscript itself. And so sometimes I even recommend that authors write their query letter very early in the process, even before their draft is finished or long before they intend to reach out to agents, because I think it can help you really see a kind of accurate image of your manuscript. And with Hope now, you have some really great tools for writing a very compelling query letter.
Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments or you want to submit anything to Folio, don't hesitate to reach out to us at awp@foliolitmanagement.com. Or if you want to reach out to AWP directly, they can be contacted at awp@awpwriter.org. Thanks again, and hope we hear from you soon. Take care.